Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to Heartline Ministry. Have you considered my servant Job? We're going to talk about that in just a few moments.
Celebrating Christ our King, lifting up his holy banner, marching into the promised land. Chains of sin have now been broken. There is glory in this place, where the Joshua generation walking in his amazing grace, walking in his amazing grace.
Well, greetings, everyone. We want to thank you so much for tuning into Heartline Ministry. I'm Pastor Harold Noyes, pastor of the Community Christian Church located on the Lower Road in Athens, Vermont. Next to me is my co-host, Pastor Timothy Golden, and he's pastor of Life on Main in Charlestown, New Hampshire. We are starting today, to me, a very important and wonderful study, and it's going to be on the book of Job. And, you know, I've been doing some work on, I have a session I'm going to be doing for better men having to do with integrity. And as I read the first chapter of Job, I'm not sure there's a man with any more integrity than Job himself. Yeah. You know, I read this chapter, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. I read this chapter, and I see the integrity of Job, and it was all based around his relationship to God. You don't have a relationship with God, it's going to be very hard to be really a person of great integrity. You know, and we find that with Job. And I'm excited about this. We're going to be looking at the man Job, and we're not going to look at his trials and tribulations today. At least I'm not planning on it at this point in time. Next week we'll look at the trials and the tribulations, because in the first 6 verses, it talks about his faith, his family, his fortune, his friends, and so forth. And then the last couple of verses talks about how he responded. And all of that shows to me the wonderful integrity of this man.
Right.
You know, so I'm just raring to go. I'm ready to go, and I'm excited about it too. So I'm going to open in prayer. I'm going to have you read the first chapter, and then we're going to talk basically the first 6 verses or so, and then we're going to go to the last couple of verses just to look at the man Job. And if you want to emulate somebody, and now I know we're supposed to emulate Jesus Christ and all of that, but if you want to emulate a person, a man, a regular man like you and me, Job would be a good one to think about.
And that's a biblical thing to do. Now, even Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ."
Right.
You know, it's we need sometimes to have that Jesus with flesh on to follow after.
Yeah, you know, and it's just really neat. It's really neat that we can have this. And Tim, my goal today is to help us as not only men but of human beings to put on integrity, because you know sometimes. I sense that integrity is going down the drain.
Gone.
It has gone. You know, there just doesn't seem to be any there.
Right.
And maybe we ought to really define what is integrity. You know, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. I'm going to open in prayer, and then I'm going to have you read, and then we'll start with that. Okay. Father, we thank you so very, very much for this wonderful example of the man Job, your servant. Father, that the one that you said so many wonderful things about. Lord, help us as human beings to look at him and to see, if Job did it, I can do it. If Job succeeded, if Job had the victories, we can have the victories. So, Father God, just use Tim and I, be with each one who will be watching, who will be listening, that, Father God, this will touch us to become people of integrity. We're going to thank you in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. So starting at verse 1, I'm reading out of the New King James today. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and the man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the works of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong.
Wow. We think we have problems. However, this chapter goes and says, wait a minute, one right after another. It wasn't like there was any time span to catch your breath or anything. It's just, as he was speaking, as the servants were speaking, it says, another servant came, and another servant came, and another servant came. And I said, whoa. Job went through it.
Yeah.
But where was his victories? And what I'm asking for all of us today in our lives is, are there victories today for you and me, despite whatever trial, whatever tribulation, whatever hardship we may go through? Can we have victory today? And what is the key to getting that victory? Well, I think Job shows it to us. Yeah. I think Job really helps us to see it and helps us to do this. And that's where the integrity comes from. Matter of fact, definition of integrity, at least that I found, and maybe you can add to it, Tim, is integrity is to be perfect or blameless, upright, a person who has moral principles, and a person who lives by principle. Now, is there another addition to integrity that you would think of that would be
That pretty much sums it up. I would just tend to add to that the importance of knowing where those morals are coming from.
Yep.
And this is what made him such a man of integrity, because it wasn't integrity based upon what man thought or upon what culture thought. Because we know, we're seeing it in our day and in our age, right? That what is seen as being wrong one year, the next year can be seen as being A-okay.
Yeah.
You know, what was seen as a sin once, that all of a sudden now becomes not only accepted, but promoted, and those that hold any other view begin to get ridiculed and chastised, right? So what's right has become wrong, what's wrong has become right.
Right.
And so integrity has got to be based on something other than culture or upon what we know to be true, or what we as people have identified as true. It's got to come from some source that's eternal, that is unchanging, and that is the only way that we'll always keep our integrity in check. And that is what Job did. And what I love most about this book, and just kind of give us a little bit of a preface into this. So this is like the oldest book of the Bible.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's like the first one that was really penned. And on top of that, where Uz was, is not really known. But scholars and theologians and tradition has surmised that it was most likely around in the area of Edom, which was in like northern Arabia. Now, what makes this very important, because when we read through the Old Testament, what do we see? We see it's a story of God and his children Israel. But the area where Job most likely lived was outside of Israel. So this carries with it not only the fact that it's the oldest book, the first one that God saw fit to see penned, but it involves someone that was outside the chosen people. But yet he was someone that loved God. And so what that is important for us today is the fact that if you are not a Jew, you are outside of Israel,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But through Christ, we have been given that ability to have that right relationship, the kind of relationship that Job had, where he was seen by God himself as being his servant.
I was just wondering, as you were sharing, Tim, where would Job have heard, or how did Job come to knowing God in this personal way that he apparently knew him? Mm-hmm. Just by what we read here in chapter 1. Mm-hmm. What was it that kind of spurred that on? I mean, like you say, he was outside of what most people would say would be the common God's people kind of a thing. So, I have to really, look at that and say, gee, this is really interesting that God would now come and choose somebody outside of that he would attract himself or to embrace himself to God.
Yeah. And in relationship to that, I think of a woman, her name was Helen Keller.
Yep.
And younger generation, I don't know if they know of her. We obviously do. But she was a woman who was deaf, dumb, and mute, and blind. And so she had no sensory ability to understand. She had never been able to see. In her deafness, she couldn't read lips. She couldn't read sign language, anything like that. And she couldn't hear anything. So when they finally learned how to communicate with her and found a way to do that, the person shared the gospel with her. And she made this very interesting statement. She's like, I've always known him. I just never knew his name.
Yep.
And so how did somebody that had no ability to gain from the five senses anything about God, but yet she knew him?
Yeah, and this, to me, this just shows the wonderful power and the reality that Jesus Christ desires that none should perish. And that his desire is that all would come to a saving knowledge of Christ.
Right.
I've heard stories from missionaries, for example, who would go out into the bush country and they would start talking to the natives of that land about Jesus Christ. And they would say, oh, we already know him. We may not have known his name, but we already know him.
Yeah. Well, today you're seeing a huge revival breaking out in Iran, where many, many Muslims are coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, not because of a missionary, But because in the privacy of their own home, many, when they've been sleeping, they have had the revelation of Jesus Christ given to them, and they have fallen to their knees and repented. Nobody led them to Christ except God himself.
God himself. And, and this has to be, in my view, at least, as I look at Job, where there would have been nothing there tangible that we could see or hear or think about, where God just kind of revealed himself to this man, and he knew him. He was intimate with him, and he knew him. Tim, I want to start off like in chapter 1 and just verse 1, and just look at Job's faith. What kind of a man was he? We know where he's from. We know his name. By the way, knowing his name means that he was a real human being. There are some who would like to say, oh, Job is just a fictitious character that God picked out of the air to illustrate a story. No. How do I know that? Because he used a real man with his name. And oftentimes, in the parables, for example, when God is giving a parable or giving an example, if he uses a person's name, Lazarus and the rich man, for example, you know that is an event that happened because he uses the name.
That's right.
And we have here that God is using this man's name. So he is a real, live human being, and all of this happened.
Yep.
This is just not a story. That's why oftentimes when I refer to things like this, Tim, I refer to it as, let's talk about the account of Job. Let's not talk about the story of Job, because the story of Job means that, well, maybe we added some to it, we embellished a little bit to make it a little more exciting. No, this is the reality of what Job has gone through in his life. Okay, so it's not just a story; it is real. Okay, now I want everybody to understand that this is real. So you have a man, Job. His name is Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. So what was his faith like? What is your faith like? If they were to write a book about you, or if they were to write a book about Harold, would they be able to say in verse 1 that a blameless man, an upright man, I fear God, and I shun, or I use the word hates, evil. So when he saw sin, and sin was present around him, how did he respond? He hated it.
Yep.
He wanted nothing to do with it. Where you had mentioned earlier at the beginning of this broadcast, where, we're starting to accept, and we are accepting things that last year was a sin. This year is okay. How come? What made the difference? Yeah, with God, sin is what? Sin is sin. Has God changed his mind? No. Hebrews tells us he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not change. So his view of sin back in Job's day is the same as his view of sin in yours and my day.
Yeah, this concept of fearing God carries, it's such a deep word, because it carries with it a concept of reverence, a concept of respect, and also the concept of fear.
Yeah.
The word does mean an aspect. I think I've mentioned here before, that my dad loved me. I loved my dad. But if he expected something of me when I was growing up and I didn't fulfill that thing, there was a healthy fear of Dad. Right. I wasn't really necessarily quick to want to see him because I knew I had let him down. I had not met up to his standards that day. Not so much because of the punishment that might come, because he was not one. In fact, I don't think even back in the days when spankings were pretty normal, he never.
I
think did. My mom, on the other hand, she made up for it. But, there's this concept that I think we've lost in our relationship with God. If we were to write this book today, if it was to be written, we wouldn't be able to use the word feared God. We might use the word loved God, that had relationship with God. but we often wouldn't use the word fear. And fear does not mean that he ran scared of God, but it had such a reverence, understanding his holiness as well as his unholiness, understanding what God's standards were and wanting to do everything in his life to rise up to those standards. Knowing he'd always miss the mark, because we read later that he was constantly making
Right.
offerings and sacrifices, right? But there's this aspect to want to rise up towards. He did not consider himself, even, and God said about him, right, that he's my servant. And I'm not saying that he didn't have friendship with God, but he understood his role to God was a servant,
Yep.
first and foremost. And anything else he was granted beyond that was icing on the cake, right? The servanthood was what was important. And I think we need to get back to some of that if we are going to be people of integrity, because it's only when you really understand that level of fear and reverence and respect of God and his standards that we will then want to live a life that is pleasing and a life that represents his.
Yeah. You know, I had a professor in college, and it's amazing. I still remember this because that was, seems like 100 years ago, that his name was Dick Lewis. And he would, when he would be talking about something like this, he would use the definition, the awe of God.
Yeah.
You know, when you just kind of, you look and you say, oh, wow, I'm now in the presence of Almighty, sinless, perfect, all-powerful, sovereign God. And it just stand in awe. It's like you know, if you were going and visiting with a celebrity that you like very much, and you just say, wow. Well, think about that 1,000,000 times over, 1,000,000,000 times over with God. That's how I see fear.
Yeah, and we see many examples of that in Scripture, you know. And don't get me wrong, I love the song, and I probably talk about this one too, but I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah.
That was written by Bart Millard a number of years back, you know, and the concept of, will I stand before him or will I fall? You know, will I have my hands raised or will I be just so overwhelmed?
Will I dance?
Yeah, and I often thought, I wonder how I respond. But you know what? As I've read through Scripture more and more and studied it more and more, I think I know how I'm going to respond. It's the same way everybody did. I think of Peter.
Yeah.
When it was just Jesus in the boat and no understanding of exactly who Jesus was, he was just doing whatever he was told, and he was just living life. But when he came to the realization of who was in the boat with him, it tells us he fell to his face.
Yep.
And he became aware of how unworthy he was to have Christ. He didn't tell Jesus, get out of my boat, you don't belong here. But he brought himself to that total place of humility, and by just throwing himself before Jesus and just saying, you know, and acknowledging that role. And that's where I think Job was. He really understood that.
You know, what I find very, very interesting as you look at this, and it talked about the man Job, he was blameless, upright, one who feared God. By the way, who is the author of this book? Okay, it wasn't Job.
That's right.
Job is a penman. God is the author. So who is making that statement in verse 1? God is.
Yeah.
This is God's view of who Job is. Matter of fact, if I go over to chapter 2, verse 3, it says, Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth. He is blameless, he is upright, one who fears God. He hates evil or shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So God is looking at him and saying, he's the man.
Yeah. Well, what I love about this, and it wasn't until I was reading this week, after all the years I've been brought up in the church for 50 plus years, and it never dawned on me until this time when I read it, which is almost shameful, but how many times we've put verses in the wrong place when people have preached this. Because the way I've often heard this preached is Satan came before God, mentioned about different things, and he's like, well, have you considered my servant Job? As though, okay, here's the situation. Well, why don't you go test Job? It's not that at all. The only thing Satan said to God before this is God says, hey, where do you come from? Oh, I've been roaming the earth. Hey, Did you check out Job?
Yeah.
What do you think of that guy?
Yeah.
You know, it's like Satan didn't come asking for Job initially. God just said, man, he wanted to brag on his kid.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, hey, have you seen my servant Job? Isn't that awesome? Have you seen how much he loves me? What's wrong with you, dude?
Yep.
You know, type attitude. And he's like, well, yeah, of course he's going to follow you. He's got everything going
look at what
for
you've done
him, you
for him.
know?
Yep.
Okay, well, let me prove to you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but the whole concept initially wasn't that Satan came and God wanted to find someone that he could test. It's like, no, he was so pleased with Job, he couldn't be silent about him.
Yeah, you know, in looking at this, and the way you just put this, Tim, is so beautiful, because so many of us today in Christendom, we get upset with God when God tests us or God allows us to go through something. You know, look, that's something that he's allowed us to go through has a purpose to it. That is to train us, that is to teach us, that is to help us to lean more and more on who God is.
Right.
But we look at it as a horrible thing. We're gonna see that in a few moments at the end of this chapter. But we like to push blame on God. God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing? Job doesn't say that. Job never says that. You know. Now that doesn't mean he doesn't question God, because he has every right to question God. You and I have every right to say, I don't understand. You know, because we're finite. We're not infinite, and we have that. So we get that, and so God's testimony in chapter 1, God's testimony in chapter 2 is, how would you like to have God say that about you? How would you like to have God say that about me? Where God says, by the way, have you seen my man Harold? You know, what do you think?
Yep.
Yeah, what do you think? Now, listen to this. This is an intriguing verse. This is in chapter 2, verse 9. And it says, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? I mean, right there you know that he was certainly a man of integrity, because even his wife is saying, look, you have been upright, you have been perfect, mature or whatever, in all your ways. Are you still going to hold to that? Look at what's happening to you. Are you still going to do that? I mean, it seems to me in verse 9 that she's even expecting him to. That he was going to hold to his integrity. My question for us today, when we go through trials, we go through tribulations, we go through hardships, are we going to hold to our integrity? Or are we going to bow down to the dictates of the circumstances and the situations around us and allow that to ruin our life?
Well, the mere concept, her even mentioning that's amazing, because number one, it shows her lack of integrity. Because basically what is she saying there? She's saying, you've tried to live moral and upright, and look at where it's gotten you.
Yeah.
It's brought you nothing. Well, if that's your definition of integrity, is I will do good because of what it will bring me, that's not very, if it's a word, integritus.
Yeah.
I'm making it a word now
Yeah,
if it's not.
good for you.
But, integrity means I'm not going to do something just because it's going to be good for me, just because it's somehow going to bring me some kind of blessing. What moved him to be a person of integrity was his fear and love of God.
Right.
End of story. Not what it could get him, not what it could gain him, not for what kind of prosperity might follow, contrary to what you want to hear on Christian television a lot of times, right? It was the fact that God simply is, and I will worship him no matter what, whether good comes, whether bad comes. And he said that right there in that one area, marking his integrity. Lord gives, Lord takes away, but what's his response? Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Right.
No matter what comes, it doesn't change the fact that his name deserves to be blessed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I look at this and I have to wonder, for us, there's another concept. You talked about fearing God and loving God and standing in awe of God. But I think there's one more concept that we have lost, and that is to shun evil. To hate sin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Paul talks to us about that. Even the great apostle Paul talks about how sinful sin is, how wicked it is. Yet today, sin is no longer a terrible thing. Sin's almost something that we embrace and not shun.
Yeah, and even in Christian circles.
Yeah.
The number of Christians that you'll run into that will be like, well, I know it's a sin, but, if I do it, I can just go to God and he'll forgive me anyway.
Yeah. It's almost like this easy believism or easy whatever, where, well, God's grace is sufficient, so I'm all set. Well, I think we're going to find things a little different. Anyway, that's just my own personal opinion, where, Job's testimony is this. God's testimony of Job is this. He feared God and he shunned. He stayed away from, he backed away from, he ran from, if you will, evil.
Yeah. And here's the thing. You can't do one without the other.
Yep.
You cannot genuinely fear God if you're not willing to shun evil.
Right.
Because to not shun evil is to actually not fear God.
Right. Now we go down in verse 2, and it goes and it talks about his family. And I find it very interesting that what this man does, what Job does with his family. Now, he has a large family. All right, he's got
10 kids,
seven sons and 3 daughters, and so he's got 10 kids. One of the things that I find very interesting is when the kids were all meeting together, they included the sisters. That was unheard of in those days.
Yeah,
women were left back in the corner someplace, but not in Job's day. He taught his sons to respect their sisters. And I really find that to be really, really interesting. So you have the size of his family here, and then and his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on the appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was when the days of feast. So they get together regularly. What is happening in our world today?
Yeah.
Families are breaking up. Families are not getting together. I remember as a boy that we would used to go to family reunions, and we have a huge family reunion. We don't do that anymore.
No.
Why? My grandmother's passed away. My aunts have passed away, who were always the ones pushing this thing. And I could never really understand, how come they're pushing it? Well, maybe they're pushing it because, you know something? It is a biblical concept that we as family need to spend time together. And Job, I believe, pushed that with his kids or taught it to his children. You got to, and in the commentaries I was reading, it said these appointed days. Maybe these appointed days would be their birthdays. So they would have 10 celebrations a year, at least for their birthdays.
Yep.
And who knows how many others that they would have. We don't see that today. Families are so far apart.
No, and the way that I kind of read it also is, and I think that's definitely true. By also reading there, each was appointed day. So what I kind of saw in that when I was reading it is, okay, you know what? We think that, and Dad has really instilled in us so much about the importance of family. You know what? Every Sunday, let's get together for dinner. Today, this week, we're going to do it at my house.
Yeah.
But so you aren't all always having to be the ones sacrificing and having to come. I'll do it this week. So, John, why don't you go ahead and do it next week? And Joe, how about you do it the week after? And so there was a sense of, in that, a mutual respect one for another, because they, for these appointed days, shifted from one home to another. No one of them elevating themselves as being somehow or another more privileged than the other.
Yeah. So I just, when I saw that, I said, wow, we got to get back to these family gatherings where we learn to love each other again and respect each other and honor each other and want to be with each other. And apparently that's one of the things that Job, in his integrity, instilled in his kids. He did that. But there's something else he instilled in his kids that I thought were very, very interesting. So when his sons would go and they would do feasting on the appointed day, then verse 5, and when the days of feasting had run their course. So it wasn't really just a one-day affair. It could be a week-long affair.
Yeah.
And certainly back in that time and that area of the world, they knew how to party. I mean, they knew how to spend time together. So you have that. So when it had run its course, it could have been a day, it could have been 3 days, could have been a week, whatever the case. When it had run its course, Job had sent and sanctified them, and he would rise up early in the morning, offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. So what did he do? He covered his kids with the offering to God. And I really know in verse 5, as I'm reading it, I really know, Job's thing would be, and if they have sinned, Lord, I cover their sin with this offering. And how many of us as parents do that with our kids? We don't even, a lot of families today, even Christian families today, they don't even talk to their kids about God or anything about the Bible or anything about church or anything of this stuff. What did Job do? He went and he covered them with an offering, with a burnt offering, according to the number of them. So there'll be at least 10 offerings that he would give, and each one had a name to it. This is for John, this is for Bill, this is for Sarah, this is for, and he did that. I mean, how intense would that be? My wife has gotten into this thing where now she's writing. She has a Facebook page for our family, and every morning she's writing on it. I'm praying for you today. Let's use today to glorify Christ. And all of our kids are receiving this, and grandkids and so forth. They're receiving that and saying, this is what we need to do. And wouldn't that be the same thing that he's doing right here? He's covering the kids with the offering. And all 10 of them. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned. Now, he didn't say they did, but just in case.
Because I know how, like I said, I know how partying is.
You
know, and if you're feasting for days, there was wine. Whether or not you want to admit. I mean, we see that was normal in that culture. We see it at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. Right, and we know that was definitely wine because they were taught about how. Usually they wait until everybody's
the best.
At the end, everybody brings out the worst. Why? Because you're so inebriated.
You don't care.
You don't care.
Right.
And so he understood that, and that's what would bring them to, because he knew that you tend to throw care to the wind when you're in that mode, and so that tendency then to maybe have sinned or cursed is greater, given that kind of scenario. So, but again, it's that reflection of how serious he took his relationship with God. That I don't know if they sinned or not, but I'm not taking any chances.
Right.
I'm coming before my Father, and I want to make sure things are okay.
And I love the end of verse 5, Tim, where it said, thus Job did regularly. He just didn't do it, well, I heard stories about my kid's party last night, so I better bring them before God. No, he did it regularly. This was a custom in which he did, and he did it to cover his kids. How many of us as parents, grandparents, great-grandparents for me, how many of us are covering our kids in our prayer life, in our regular life, in our testimony, in how we live? Are we covering our kids with that? We really need to start doing that. And I think Job is a great picture for us, which is a picture of his integrity. How much integrity do we have? Do we cover our kids? Do we pray for our kids? Do we regularly speak to our kids? Do we, whatever do we?
And it's realizing too, again, these kids are adults now. They're living lives. They have homes of their own. And stuff like that. So it's not just, because I think even those that do figure, well, I do it, but once they're 18, once they move out of the house they're
gone, right?
And my responsibility's over. No, it's not. It's not over until you breathe your last.
And that's the way, I mean, my kids, I'm 75 years old. My daughter is 52. My next son is 49. Then I got one 47. When I know that they've been out or if they've been away, I write them. Let me know when you get home. And they laugh at me. They say, Dad, I'm 50 years old. I said, I don't care. I don't care if you're 100 years old. You're still my kid, and I need to know what's going on. And they may say, well, Dad, you get nosy. Well, you know something? I need to know because you're my kid. Well, put that in God's view. God cares that much about us too.
Yeah.
And in fact, he shows that with Job. Have you considered my man Job?
Yeah.
He had it all together. He knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the beginning from the ending. So he knew all of that. But Job did this regularly. Do you pray for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren regularly? Do you speak to them regularly when you see them about the Lord Jesus Christ, about who he is, about what he's done for you? My wife babysits our great-grandkids, which are really small. But she has a Bible study with them every time that they come to the house. Teaching them little Bible stories or whatever. And they're only 2, 3, 4 years old. But she's doing it. Why? Because we have a responsibility. Job had a responsibility, and he did it regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought the kids before God regularly.
Yeah.
And, boy, I think that's something that is really missing in our culture. We're not doing that anymore.
Right.
And to me, that is a terrible, terrible thing. So did it. Now, one thing I've already brought up, but I want to bring it up again, and they included the girls.
Mm-hmm.
That's unheard of in Job's day. That's unheard of in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
But not according to Job.
Right.
Not according to what he taught the sons.
Mm-hmm.
We got to invite Sarah and Sally and Susie. We got to make sure that they're a part of this because they're part of our family. And they did it. And that was something that Job instilled in them. Now, Job was not a poor man by any means. If you look at verse 3, you find that he was the wealthiest of wealthy, of all that he had. He had a fortune.
Yep.
He had a fortune.
Yeah. He was the Elon Musk of the day.
Yeah, he was. He was. I mean, he was all of that. And yet he did not let his wealth or his fame or anything else get in the way of his family. Mm. And he did not let it get in the way of his relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And how often do we allow things to get in our way in our relationship with God? Right. So we've looked at his faith, we've looked at his family, we looked at his fortune, but how about his friends? Now, certainly a big part of the story of Job are his friends, right? And you and I would look and say, yeah, friends like these guys, who needs enemies, right?
Right.
Well, in chapter 2, verse 11 says, and now Job's 3 friends heard of this adversity that had come upon him. Each of them came from his own place, Eliphaz, the Termite, and Bildad, and Zophar, and so forth. They had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. That was their intention.
Yep.
However, if we go further into the account, we find that best intentions of men, right?
Right.
They didn't do that. I want to go over to chapter 42 just for a second, because this verse means so much to me. Verse 10, Job now has lost everything. Everything is gone. Everything, he's now a poor man. I mean, he's got sores. He's like a leper, despised by everybody, and a poor man. Watch what happens. Verse 10, the Lord restored Job's losses when? Okay, so there is a particular time, there is a particular circumstance, situation where God restored his losses. And you know when that was? When he prayed for his friends. Even though they had done evil to him, even though they may not, first of all, intended to hurt him, they hurt him badly. But you know something? Job did not hold that against him. He prayed for his friends. And when he had prayed for his friends, God restored his losses. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Let me ask you a question. Are you praying for those who despitefully use you? Are you praying for those who hurt you? Are you praying for those who harm you? Whatever the case may be. Or are you despising them and saying, I want nothing to do with it, I wish they were dead? Which is the way that the society and our world is going today. Mm-hmm. You don't agree with me, I'm going to shoot you. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to I'm going to ruin your name. I'm going to do. No. What did Job do? Job prayed for him, and what did God do? God blessed him.
Yep.
And that's what I think that we need to get back to.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it reflects his integrity. The fact that after all the stuff has befallen him,
Yep.
still his thought was not for himself.
Yep.
Right? Even God said prior to that, when he, interacted with those friends, said, "You've dealt poorly with me. You have not dealt rightly
Right.
as Job has."
Right.
Even through all of this, and so his focus was still always on God. Again, as you said, not that he didn't question, not that he didn't have his concerns, but he never used those as some sort of God, you owe me type thing.
Right.
He was a very, very selfless man, always thinking of God, and even in that moment, it said thinking of his friends. His prayer wasn't for himself.
Yeah.
It was for God. Or
I
for
really
his
believe
friends.
that verse, what he was praying for them is, Lord, help them. They don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
Really. Of all that they said to him, how many times did they mention God? Or how many times did they refer to God as being a friend, or referring to God as being someone who loves you and cares for you? No. And, so I really think he was praying for them. Lord, you got to touch them. Because they don't have a clue who you really are.
Yeah.
And how many times are we praying for our friends that way? Are we praying for our enemies that way?
Mm.
Lord, open their eyes that they may see glimpses of truth
Right.
Thou hast for me. Open their eyes that they would do that. I want to go down to verses 20 through 22 in the last few minutes of this broadcast, because I really find that of Job in his integrity, this is how he responded. Verse 20. Job
And this
arose,
is of chapter 1.
chapter 1. Oh, yes, chapter 1, verse 20. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground. And what did he do?
Worship.
He worshiped. He lost everything in just a matter of moments. Not over weeks, not over years, just in a matter of moments. He lost everything. And what did he do? He feared God, he shunned evil, and he worshiped. Wow, he was releasing his grief to God. That's what he was doing. How do I know that? Because look what he did. He tore his robe. We look at it and say, well, is that wrong? No, he was hurting. And do you think that God was looking down at him and said, son, you shouldn't be doing that? No. God says, look, you're a hurting man. I understand. He tore his robe. He shaved his head, but he fell down and he worshiped. Look at the end of verse 20, where it goes and it says, he fell to his ground. He responded to God's goodness. Isn't that amazing? He did. Even though he lost everything. How do I know that? Look what he says, verse 21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I'm going to return. How many of us are going to take anything with us? The only thing we're going to take with us is what we do here.
Mm-hmm.
And if we respond the way that Job responded, if we take on the integrity of a Job in response to our family, in response to our trials and tribulations, in response to all that besets us, then we'll be taking something wonderful to glory.
Yeah.
We won't be taking our bank accounts, won't be taking the cars, we'll be taking something so much more profitable or priceless before God.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point of where he was at. It's like all these things, they mean nothing
Mean
to me.
nothing to me.
They are things that are going to fade away one
Yep.
time or another. But, the thing that really matters is the Lord, and it's his role in my life. And so I will worship no matter what's coming my way. And what allowed him to say that, I think that this is crucial for us to understand. If we do not spend time worshiping God and spend time drawing close to him and being in great relationship with him in the good times, you will not do it in the bad times.
Right.
It's because he lived in that place. It's because of his time with God. No matter what the season was in his life, it was during those times of all of his wealth. We know that it was from his encounter with God's encounter with Satan, that a lot of the blessings that came were a result of the fact that he chose to serve God. And so the fact that he was living rightly and living in constant relationship with God is the source of where all those blessings were. And he continued to remain there. And that's the difference. Yep. Lots of times, like with Israel, what you see happen throughout the rest of the Old Testament is when prosperity came, what did they do? They lost sight of God.
They lost sight of who God is.
But what he did is he stayed true. And because he stayed true, when the difficulties came upon him and befell him, he knew the character of his God.
Yeah.
And he knew his God still loved and cared for him, no matter what circumstances looked like. That's why he was able to worship in that time and not get caught up in the woe is me.
You know, I look at this too, and Job was saying, look, you know something? When I came into this world, I had nothing, but God gave it to me.
Yep.
It's all because of him. Job was not saying, oh, because I was a good with finances, or because I was a good farmer, or because I was no. God gave this to me. And one last point, and then we got to get going. Is at the end of verse 22. In all this, Job did not sin and charge God with wrong. You know something? He did not say blame God for all that happened. How many people today blame God when something befalls them? You know, it's all God's fault. It's all this. No, he would not do it. He remained guiltless before God.
Yeah.
That is the man Job.
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish I could be like Job.
Yeah.
I wish I could.
And he wasn't in that encounter between God and Satan, but in that you see what happened in the heavenly realm, because what we heard mentioned there is when Satan brought up the issue to God, he said, now, God, you stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he'll surely curse you. You touch him.
Yeah.
But what the Lord said to him, said, behold, all he has is in your power.
Yep.
I'm not going to do it. If this is going to happen, you're the one doing it. I'm not going to be the one that does this. So that's why he could be charged with no wrong.
Yep. I'm Pastor Harold Noyes, pastor of the Community Christian Church located on the Lower Road in Athens, Vermont. And if you're in the area, we'd love to have you stop by and say hi to us. We have morning worship at 9:30. We have evening worship at 6 on Sundays. We have Bible studies all during the week. Just drop us a line.
And if you're in the Charlestown, New Hampshire area, come on down to Life on Main. Check us out. We're at the Senior Center at 223 Old Springfield Road, Sunday mornings, coffee hour, 10 o'clock, morning worship at 11. Love to have you come be a part of that. Call our office if you want to get hooked up with any of our small groups during the week. We do thank everyone here at Fact TV for making the program possible. You can check them out at fact8.com and also find all of our Heartline episodes right there, as well as on our social media pages and things of that nature. We do also want to bring your attention that on the last Saturday of September, which I think the date's the 28th, I could be wrong, but the last Saturday of this month, in the police station, fire station parking lot in Charlestown, we are having a blessing of the badges. We're doing that alongside of the Anglican Church, and but just time to be able to pray for and bless our first responders. So if you happen to be in the area, come on down Saturday, 10 o'clock, last Saturday of this month.
Great. Next week, we'll be looking at the test of Job, the trials in which he went through. Chapter 1 still. Thank you so much.